I am 65 years old, but sometimes I feel like I carry the weight of 3 lifetimes. I had come to the city, exchanging the comforting damp earth of my Carolina garden for the sharp angles of glass and concrete, solely to retire and live with my son, Marcus. I thought it was a necessary concession to age. People, hospitals, everything conveniently close at hand. Instead, I found myself tethered to a new, unsettling rhythm. Every single night, precisely at 3 o'clock, the shower started. The sound was a visceral assault, the water roaring through the pipes in the wall next to my headboard, loud enough to suggest someone wasn't just cleaning themselves, but trying to scour the very soul of the night. One cold, unforgiving night, my ingrained instinct for self-preservation battled my surging, irrational curiosity. I crept out of bed, the silence of the luxury apartment amplified by the frantic deluge behind the wall. What I saw through the narrow crack of the slightly ajar bathroom door didn't just frighten me, it chilled me to the bone, freezing the breath in my throat. The very next morning, before the city had fully woken, I packed my single suitcase and quietly left. No argument, no discussion, just a swift, necessary retreat to a private assisted living community. The way you abandon a house when the profound, undeniable cold settles in. Before this gilded cage, my life had unfolded in the quiet consistency of our small town in the Carolinas. Late fall, there clung to the window panes like a stubborn draft, a dry, mean cold that slipped under the painted sills. Our little old house, with its charmingly carved trim, had witnessed every phase of my existence. A young high school English teacher, a weary widow, and finally, a woman whose hands, now lightly spotted and laced with strands of silver hair, still automatically reached out to straighten the curtains and set the kettle on the stove, performing the same rituals they had for decades. On the mantelpiece stood a photograph of my late husband, still rigid and imposing. Even in death, his eyes seemed to hold an expectation of obedience. When I looked at that stern face, 2 complex emotions always intertwined, a deep pity for the life that was cut short, and a quiet, profound relief that I no longer had to anticipate the heavy, demanding echo of his footsteps in the hall. They say discretion demands you speak only kindly of the deceased, but the purple and yellow bruises you meticulously concealed beneath thick foundation, and the scathing words that lashed out sharper than a leather belt, they don't simply vanish when the casket closes. They merely recede into a quiet, cold corner of your memory, waiting for a fresh trigger. He had been a rough, overbearing man who viewed both me and Marcus as his personal possessions. Our salvation, ironically, came on the day we received 2 contrasting pieces of news. We learned his cancer was too advanced for surgery, and simultaneously, a crisp letter arrived for Marcus confirming his acceptance into a top state university. In that moment, I buried all my accumulated anger and hurt, performing my wifely duty out of sheer obligation, not love. I knew I had to maintain the facade, caring for him until the end so that Marcus could start, and more importantly, continue, his education without disruption. When his eyes finally closed forever, I felt nothing resembling grief. There was only the immense physical sensation of something impossibly heavy finally sliding off my shoulders, something that had constricted my breathing for 20 years. It was just the 2 of us then, mother and son, and I poured every ounce of my effort into lifting him up, believing his success would justify my sacrifices. I taught classes, graded papers late into the night, took on extra translation work in the evenings, and many dinners consisted of nothing more than tea and dry crackers. It was an agonizing long haul. Marcus was brilliant and driven, but his temper was quick, inherited perhaps, and volatile. Whenever his brow furrowed, his jaw clenched, and his voice began to rise in that sharp, commanding tone, I was instantly overwhelmed by that old, quiet animal fear. It's coming now. The storm is starting. Every time I would gently intervene, talking him through his frustration, diligently working to smooth the sharp, unforgiving edges of his character with my patience. I truly believed he was capable of change. I believed he would come right. And for a long time, he didn't disappoint me. He excelled in college, secured a lucrative job at a major corporation, and rapidly ascended the corporate ladder, eventually becoming a regional manager. He married Simone, a sweet, reserved girl who moved through the world with a quiet grace. We bonded cautiously, gently, right away. Now, I thought, looking out over my rows of tomatoes, my quiet old age is finally here. I envisioned spending slow mornings in the warm dirt of my vegetable garden and tranquil evenings circling the pond with my neighbors, discussing the weather and the price of gas. I expected life to simply roll on, predictably, peaceably. But life, I learned, has a cruel sense of humor when you dare to make plans. I was standing in the vegetable patch, the scent of rich, damp earth heavy on my hands, when the phone rang, shattering the afternoon stillness. "Hey, Mom, what are you up to?" Marcus's voice, even in the simplest of greetings, always carried an underlying vibration of urgency and unspoken expectation. I wiped my dirt-stained hands on my apron and offered a wry smile to the empty air. "Just admiring the tomatoes, son. They're nearly ready for picking. What's the news?" "Simone and I have decided," he announced without preamble. "Pack your things. I'm coming this weekend to take you to the city. You're going to live with us." The words hit me like a physical blow. I froze. The thought of abandoning the house, the garden, the cool morning mist rising over the river, it instantly made my heart feel like a stone sinking in my chest. "There's no need, Marcus. I'm rooted here. I know this place. I don't know anyone in the city, and frankly, I'll only be in your way. You two are busy with work. I have my garden and my jars of preserves to keep me company." "What exactly is the problem, Mom?" His impatience, thin and sharp, was already evident. A son cares for his mother. What if you fall? Who would even know? "I've decided. Your room is prepared. No arguing." That phrase, "I've decided," struck me with the force of an icy spray. It was the exact proprietary language his father had used. I struggled to maintain my composure, attempting a gentle resistance. "Marcus, I am too old for such drastic changes. I will miss my friends, my routine, and especially my garden beds. I'll go crazy from the loneliness in a high-rise." "Friends? What friends?" he snapped, dismissing my entire social life. "Simone can take you out for walks and to the store. Hold on, she'll speak to you herself." Then I heard her voice, immediately soothing, even and bright, like warm water washing over my chilled hands. "Mom, it's Simone. Please, please come live with us. The apartment is spacious and bright, and we honestly miss you so much. Marcus is genuinely worried about your health. I promise I'll go to the market with you. We can sit and chat, and I'll show you around the neighborhood." It was almost impossible to reject her gentle, well-intentioned kindness. Yet beneath the sweetness, I distinctly recognized the note of submission in her tone. He had made the decision. She was merely extending her hand to cushion the inevitable impact. I was silent for a long, agonizing minute. Everything was battling within me. On one side, the freedom I had paid for with years of silent suffering. On the other, the heavy obligations of motherhood, my residual love for my son, and the ancient, deeply embedded fear of a man's cold rage. A terror, I realized, that doesn't perish with the abuser, but simply transfers itself into your memory, where it stubbornly lives on. "All right," I finally conceded, the word feeling small and inadequate. "Give me a couple of days to get my affairs in order." "Wonderful!" Simone sounded profoundly relieved. "We'll be there this weekend." I hung up and stood alone in the vegetable patch, listening to the dry autumn wind rattle the dill stalks. Perhaps I am overcomplicating things, I wondered desperately. Maybe the city really will be easier. They are young, successful, and caring. My son is a grown man. What on earth am I so afraid of? I had little to take. A few comfortable dresses, a couple of cherished books, and an old cloth-bound photo album. I sat at the kitchen table and flipped through the brittle pages. Here was tiny Marcus, his laughter almost audible, clinging tight to my neck. Here was his first day of kindergarten, overwhelmed by his slightly crooked bow tie. And here he was, a young man, handsome, serious, and utterly stubborn. My heart softened with the fierce, protective love only a mother knows. I closed the album, pulled out my sturdy suitcase, and began folding my life into neat, manageable stacks, repeating the mantra, I raised him, I protected him, he's calling me, this must be right. That evening, I made the rounds, stopping at my neighbors' homes, telling them I was likely moving to be closer to my children. I listened to their genuine well wishes and quiet farewells, smiling weakly but steadily. Then, I retreated to my window seat and waited for the inevitable weekend to arrive. Marcus arrived promptly that Saturday in a sleek black Cadillac Escalade, its polished finish gleaming under the Carolina sun. He stepped out in a razor-sharp suit, flashing the confident, quick smile of a successful man who was used to getting his way, and immediately began directing the move. Bags, blankets, my precious jars of homemade preserves, the old books, the album, all were swiftly loaded. Simone was with him, gentle as ever, moving with a quiet efficiency. She was one of those women who spoke softly and worked quickly, always trying to anticipate needs and ensure she was never perceived as a burden to anyone. "Look, Mom," Marcus said, opening the expansive trunk of the Escalade. "I bought you some quality imported vitamins. You need them." I raised my hands in gentle protest. "Oh, Marcus, don't waste your money. I have everything I need." He waved his hand dismissively, an arrogant gesture that cut me off mid-sentence. "Money isn't the issue, Mom. Time is. I simply need to feel better, knowing you're nearby, and adequately looked after." The highway swallowed us whole, swiftly whisking us away from my home, where the air smelled comfortably of wet earth and bruised apples, toward the sprawling city where towering canyons of glass and concrete eclipsed the trees. We ascended into an upscale condo building and rode the silent elevator up to the 18th floor. The apartment was cavernous and greeted us with gleaming hardwood floors, heavy, expensive furniture, and a silence so profound it made my ears ring. "This is your room," Marcus announced, throwing open the door to a bright, airy bedroom with a window offering a commanding view of a small green park. He placed the air conditioner remote precisely beside the bed and patted the large television screen as if greeting an old companion. "If you need anything at all, tell Simone immediately." "Thank you, children," I replied, and I meant the gratitude sincerely. They certainly knew how to provide a flawless appearance of care. Simone deftly hung my few dresses in the walk-in closet, made the bed with fresh, new linens, and carefully arranged my personal hangers. She kept shooting quick, anxious glances my way, checking if I was tired or in pain. But I noticed that whenever Marcus entered the room, her practiced smile seemed to stretch painfully tight, like an overly taut rubber band, and a tiny, desperate glint of caution sparked deep in her eyes. I averted my gaze. It wasn't that I wished to remain ignorant, it was simply that I did not yet possess the courage to acknowledge something so sharply familiar. Our first dinner was extravagant, laid out like a holiday feast. Simone had cooked a mountain of food, delicate fish fillets, multiple salads, and a huge pot of soup. Marcus dominated the conversation, speaking in rapid, assured bursts about his projects, corporate competition, and his superior strategies for employee motivation, talking as if the very air in the room was listening attentively and nodding in agreement. "Eat more, Mom. You are far too thin," he instructed, placing a generous piece of fish onto my plate. "I can serve myself, thank you, son," I murmured gently, but he had already pivoted to his wife, his tone flattening into something hard and unmistakable. "Simone, what are you doing? Pour Mom some soup." He hadn't raised his voice, but the absence of inflection was an order, pure and cold. Simone flinched, a tiny, involuntary spasm, quickly grabbed the ladle, and her hand trembled so visibly that the spoon handle gave a light, nervous tap against the bowl's edge. I gave her the quiet, steadying smile that old teachers perfect, calm, supportive, entirely without judgment. "Thank you, sweetie. It's absolutely delicious." That night, sleep was elusive. The apartment building itself felt alive, operating on a different current. Deep inside the walls, the elevators seemed to breathe like vast, sleeping beasts. Outside my window, the headlights of distant cars stretched into shimmering, endless strings, and the city hummed a low, monotonous, pervasive sound right beneath the roofline. I sat up, running my hand over the unfamiliar texture of the heavy comforter, trying desperately to reassure myself. You get used to anything, Evelyn, as long as you maintain your health and your resolve. The first few days did seem fine. In the mornings, after Marcus left for work, Simone would link her arm through mine and walk me carefully to the grocery store. She insisted on carrying all the bags, deferred to my preferences, and continually reminded me, "You're resting today, Mom. That's your only job." Sometimes we'd browse a nearby department store. She picked out a cardigan, a soft, creamy color. "This one looks beautiful on you," she'd insist, ignoring my protests that my old, durable clothes were perfectly adequate. In the evenings, Marcus's attention was immediate and focused. "How is your blood pressure, Mom? Are you using the monitor? You must check it morning and night. Simone, ensure you record the numbers in the notebook." He spoke with smooth, meticulous concern, and I felt foolish for my own rising wariness, chastising myself for being overly suspicious. I told myself to simply accept the care and settle into this new chapter. Yet the more I observed, the more frequently I caught glimpses of an intolerable tension radiating from Simone. It was the kind of rigidity that a woman who is truly at peace should never possess. I saw the hesitation in her fingers when she carefully set a teacup down. Her eyes would invariably drop to the floor the moment he walked into a room. That quick, bright smile she wore wasn't fake exactly, but it was strained, trying too hard to achieve a specific, placating perfection. I kept silent, choosing caution. We older people, I reasoned, sometimes jump to conclusions too quickly, projecting old fears onto new situations. I was terrified of being wrong, so I chose the safer path, waiting and watching, the slow, quiet way one waits for the definitive arrival of winter at the end of a long, ambiguous fall. A week passed, then a second. I adjusted to their routine, who departed and returned when, the precise location of the towels, the correct sequence for starting the dishwasher. The city nights began to feel slightly less foreign, and my fitful dreams became a little less fractured. I almost convinced myself that the pervasive anxiety would simply dissipate on its own, like sugar dissolving quietly in tea if you avoid stirring too loudly. And then it happened again. In the deepest, quietest part of the night, when the entire enormous building seemed to be holding its breath, right at 3 o'clock, the water in the wall next to my bed began its relentless, roaring cycle. I had been startled awake earlier by a strange, profound silence, so heavy I could hear the tiny clicking sound of the clock's second hand. Then, precisely at 3, like a dreadful alarm, the water erupted, a solid, powerful, unrelenting noise, as if someone had wrenched the faucet wide open, past its intended limit. "Who is that?" I thought, panicked. "It's the dead of night. Everyone should be sleeping." I lay rigid, listening, paralyzed by the fear of making a sound, of bumping a door, or startling whoever was generating this monstrous sound. 15 minutes later, the water stopped as abruptly as it began, and the apartment returned instantly to a deep, echoing silence, like a library after closing hours. I tossed and turned, staring out at the few passing headlights, unable to reclaim sleep until the weak, gray light of morning. At breakfast, I attempted to appear completely unruffled. "Marcus?" I asked casually, keeping my voice light. "Were you feeling unwell last night? The water was running around 3 o'clock. It sounded like someone was taking a shower. He was absorbed in scrolling through news on his phone, not even glancing up. No, Mom. Just work stress. Couldn't sleep. I got up, took a quick rinse, and went back to bed. Don't worry about something so insignificant. His tone was completely flat, designed to convey how truly trivial the matter was. Simone, who was bringing the oatmeal bowl to the table, paused for a visible fraction of a second. The spoon nearly clanked against the bowl's ceramic rim. She straightened hastily and smiled, her eyes slightly too wide. Yes, Mom. He works himself too hard. Sometimes he just paces at night. Cooling off helps him settle. I nodded outwardly, accepting the explanation, but I had distinctly noticed that momentary hesitation, and something internal pinched tightly. That wasn't right, I thought, a thread of memory tugging at the edge of my consciousness. 2 subsequent nights, precisely at 3, the water started again, ticking off my escalating anxiety like a dreadful metronome. Soon, the nights grew quiet, only before 3, and I would lie awake for hours, straining to catch every tiny rustle or clink, listening for the inevitable roar. The broken, anxious sleep left my eyes gritty and shadowed in the mornings. I began to watch my son and daughter-in-law with intensified scrutiny. Marcus maintained his daytime composure, quick, professional, and efficient. But deep in his eyes, I saw fatigue, coupled with a barely contained irritation that began setting him off faster over small inconveniences. Simone moved around the apartment with forced sweetness, but her gaze consistently sought the floor when he was near. Her hands were always frantically occupied, as if standing still, even for a moment, was too dangerous. I decided I needed to speak to him, woman to man, or rather mother to son, while it was still possible to resolve the matter solely with words. I chose a window when Simone was busy in the kitchen, and Marcus and I were alone in the vast, quiet living room. "Sit down, son," I instructed, my voice pitched low and steady. "Listen to me calmly. I understand the intense stress of your work, but showering in the absolute middle of the night is not a joke. 3 o'clock is when the human body is at its most vulnerable. You risk catching a severe cold. It's terrible for your heart and your blood pressure. You are young. You have your whole life ahead. You must take care of yourself. You cannot keep doing this." I spoke as a mother, pleading rather than pressuring. His face changed instantly, as if a sharp, cold switch had been flipped inside his head. "Mom," he bit out, his voice razor-sharp, "focus on your own retirement and stay completely out of my business. I will handle myself." He stood abruptly, strode to his room, and closed the door. It wasn't a slam, but it was final, a clear, unmistakable signal that the discussion was terminated. From that moment, the air in the apartment turned thick and heavy. He barely spoke to me, and when he did, his words were short and measured, as if I were a mere stranger or an annoying subordinate. I, too, fell silent, not out of spite, but out of a deep-seated caution, because I knew that particular coldness, and I knew it never preceded anything good. And that is when I started watching Simone with focused attention. We were preparing a salad together. She reached up for a basket on a high shelf, and as her sleeve momentarily slipped back, I saw it. A bruise. It was a sickly mix of yellow and deep blue on her wrist, unnaturally shaped, precisely as if powerful fingers had clamped down hard and lingered. I gently took her hand. "Simone, what in God's name is this?" She flinched violently, immediately yanking her sleeve back down. "Oh, Mom, it's nothing. I knocked into the granite countertop. My skin is sensitive. I bruise easily," she stammered, her eyes darting away, her voice hurried and desperate, as if she was trying to physically outrun her own lies. I knew exactly what that mark represented. I knew it too intimately. But forcing her to maintain the lie would only push her deeper into shame and isolation. "Just be careful," I said quietly, releasing her hand. "A woman needs to know how to protect herself." She nodded quickly and slipped out of the kitchen, escaping the scrutiny. A few days later, she appeared for breakfast with eyelids visibly swollen and puffy. When I asked if she hadn't slept well, she offered a flimsy, forced smile. "A mosquito," she claimed, "bit me on the balcony last night." On the 18th floor with fine mesh screens on the windows, I thought bitterly. I maintained my silence. Sometimes words are useless. They only serve to shatter what is already irrevocably cracking. All these small signs kept circling back to the water at 3 a.m. I would recall my past life with a vivid, anxious clarity, like a person still huddling in a shawl they discarded years ago. I tried to deny the linkage, but deep beneath the denial, all the accumulating thoughts coalesced into one terrible truth. That 3 o'clock shower was no random act. It was a ritual, a purification, a mechanism for something far darker than simply cooling off to sleep. That terrible night, when the water began its sharp, icy, relentless roar again, I couldn't lie still any longer. I sat up in bed, waited a few seconds for the violent pounding of my heart to subside, pulled on my robe, and tiptoed into the hall. A thin strip of brilliant white light escaped from beneath the bathroom door, spilling onto the dark floor. And then, through the sound of the violent water, I heard something else entirely, a short, choked, muffled sob, followed instantly by a low, furious whisper. The bathroom door was not quite closed. There was a gap, perhaps the width of a hand. I drew closer, leaning against the cool wall for support. The white light glared. The water hissed malevolently and evenly, like a relentless January wind ripping through a tiny crack. Suddenly, distinct over the roar, I heard the other sounds again, the brief, stifled sob and the low whisper saturated with cold, undeniable fury. I stopped as if standing on the edge of thin ice, peering through the gap. I saw Marcus. He was fully dressed in his pajamas, but already soaking wet, his hair slicked and plastered to his forehead. Standing directly in front of him was Simone, also in her house clothes, completely drenched. The thin fabric clung miserably to her shoulders, molded to her figure, as the frigid spray from the shower nozzle poured directly onto her head. I could feel the cold radiating out into the hallway, raising goosebumps on my own skin. The air smelled sharply of metal and the night. He held her hair tightly at the base of her skull, high up, like gripping the reins of a horse preparing to bolt. Her head was tilted back at an agonizing angle, her pale neck exposed, and a single, thin stream of water traced a path down her collarbone. He was not shouting. He was speaking in that terrifying, low, controlled whisper that seems to vacuum all other sound out of a room. "Open your mouth one more time, understand?" The words dropped heavily into the pooling water on the tile, sounding like pebbles. Then, with a sickening suddenness, a sharp, dry, loud slap echoed off the ceramic tile, cutting viciously through the water's noise. Simone's body swayed, her knees visibly buckling, but he didn't release his grip. He yanked her higher, closer to the spray. She released a quiet, choked, muffled sob, the kind of weeping done by a person who understands, bone deep, that they are forbidden to cry out loud. A thin, fragile cord snapped deep inside my chest, the one that had held my voice captive for decades. The air around me became thick and viscous, and my hands felt numb, alien. As I struggled to grasp that this monster was my son, the boy I had raised, another layer of memory began running independently, simultaneously. The rough, forgotten texture of the old backyard, the cold, rusted rainwater barrel, the harrowing evening my husband, still very much alive then, grabbed my hair exactly the same way and savagely plunged my face into the freezing water. That same blinding white light in my eyes, the choke in my throat, the desperate, useless thrashing of my fingers on the wet, cold metal rim. I heard a gasp, an internal whisper from 30 years past. "Hush, just don't let the child hear." I did not enter the room. I did not scream. My body reacted for me, operating on an ancient, intact emergency protocol. Run. I backed away silently, returned to my quiet room on tiptoe, closed the door with agonizing care, and utterly collapsed onto the bed. I pulled the heavy comforter up over my head, hiding the way a small, terrified animal instinctually burrows when a predator's shadow falls across the snow. My heart hammered so violently that I truly thought the sound would burst through the blanket barrier and alert the entire corridor. Behind the wall, the water continued to pour, steady and prolonged, becoming the relentless, cold soundtrack to our family tragedy. Tears didn't come immediately. First, there was only the terrible, profound coldness that follows severe shock, making my teeth chatter uncontrollably. Then came the crushing shame. Not shame for my cowardly retreat, but shame for recognizing in my own son the undeniable face of the other man, the man I believed I had successfully buried alongside the hospital discharge papers and his final breath. I had foolishly believed the demon perished the moment the morgue door slid shut behind his gurney. It hadn't. It had merely found a new host, a body agonizingly familiar, and crossed the threshold. I lay there, weeping silently, not just for the drenched, brutalized woman behind the wall, but for my younger, former self. I wept for all those desperate evenings spent with heavy foundation cream, the clumsy, crumpled excuses I invented about falling off a bicycle, the late-night grading sessions with an ice pack pressed hard against my cheek, and most of all, for the small boy I had tried so diligently to save. I had smoothed his rough edges with my palm, constantly whispering the false hope. It will pass. He will come right. He had not come right. When the water finally, blessedly stopped, the ensuing silence was even heavier than before, like a vast bucket full of coal. I lay motionless until the dawn broke. With the first light, thin and colorless as cheap notebook paper, clarity arrived. The kind of stark, unassailable truth that only follows utter devastation. Everything inside me aligned simply, logically, like arithmetic. I realized I could never change Marcus. I could not penetrate the steel casing of his inherited anger. And crucially, I would not survive a second life of subservience, nor would I interpose myself between him and his wife. When you try to stand between them, the force of the blow inevitably lands on both. My only viable option was to leave alive. I got up, washed my face, and studied my reflection. The woman with the graying hair stared back, her eyes holding not lingering fear, but a cold, fragile hardness, like a deep crack running across glass on a bitter, frosty morning. You could see the damage, but the structure was still holding. In the gleaming kitchen, I put the kettle on, cooked the oatmeal, and set the table with practiced precision. Everything was routine, as if these small domestic rituals could magically hold the collapsing house together. My hands performed the simple mechanical tasks, while my mind was already racing miles ahead. Where to go? How to execute this? What exactly to say? What to pack? What to abandon? Who needs to be told? The phrase, senior living community, a concept that used to flood me with embarrassment, implying a failure of family duty, now sounded level, solid, and utterly reassuring, like the name of a reliable train station. Marcus emerged first, looking fresh, composed, and utterly immaculate, behaving as if the brutal events of the night had never occurred. Simone followed a short while later, reserved, her eyes immediately cast down. On her temple, a faint, yellowish streak, hastily covered by makeup, was visible. I felt my voice emerge from deep within my chest, soft yet uncompromising, the voice of a seasoned teacher who can halt an unruly class with a single, quiet sentence. I sat opposite them, placed my palms flat and firm on the polished tabletop to ensure they wouldn't tremble, and looked up. "Children," I began, allowing a small, deliberate pause, "I have something important to tell you." I waited again, feeling the reassuring pressure of my palms on the wood. "I thought all night, I am moving to a private assisted living community." At first, they merely stared at each other, as if convinced they had misheard the words. Marcus regained his voice first. His face instantly blotched with angry color, and his voice turned instantly metallic and cold. "What do you mean, moving? Why? You have your own son. You have everything you need right here. Do you want people to gossip that I abandoned my mother? Absolutely not. I forbid it." "This is my life," I answered calmly, meeting his gaze. "And these are my final years. I intend to spend them in a way that provides me with ease and peace. You and Simone will have more freedom, and I will have quiet. This is my decision." He pursed his lips into a tight line, drumming his fingers on the table's surface like a frustrated child tapping a lid, and stared right through me, as if I were nothing more than empty space. Simone, however, looked up sharply, as if she had been physically pushed into action. "Mom, if I offended you somehow, please, don't leave," she pleaded, her voice trembling faintly. "You have absolutely nothing to do with this, sweetie," I said, reaching out to touch her hand gently. "The city simply doesn't suit my temperament. The community is like a resort now. They have book clubs, chess tournaments, a lovely garden. You can both visit me on the weekends. That will be more than enough for me." Marcus continued to argue, cycling through the same predictable points: the shame, the damage to his professional reputation, how he had already meticulously arranged everything. I listened in silence, letting his argument exhaust itself, and then I repeated firmly, "I have decided." In my voice was the same non-negotiable firmness that children recognize in their mothers when they understand that further argument is utterly futile. By lunchtime, the matter was settled. He took charge, calling the expensive facility on the city's outskirts himself, arranging a room, and ordering a private car. He maintained a distant, businesslike demeanor, like a manager swiftly solving a logistical problem, not a son seeing off his mother. I packed my small suitcase, the few dresses, 2 books, the album. At the threshold, I paused and looked back. The apartment was impeccably beautiful, everything gleaming and expensive, but the atmosphere was sterile and cold, like a vast winter train station lobby. I looked at my son. Nothing of the laughing boy in the photographs remained on his face, only a cold, hard shell. I looked at Simone. She was pale, slender, standing perfectly still by the door. Her gaze was that of a person who has internalized the devastating lesson that she has no right to speak. I offered her a slight, private nod, a silent promise. "Hold on." She immediately dropped her eyes. The assisted living community welcomed me with its reassuring straight pathways, predictable routines, and consistent, gentle care. There was no shouting, doors never slammed, and most crucially, at 3 o'clock in the morning, absolutely no one turned on a shower. My days settled quickly into a structure. Mornings involved light exercise, followed by breakfast with my new acquaintances, and then the library, where the lamps glowed softly under green shades. Afternoons were spent in the garden, sitting on a sturdy bench, feeling the warm, uncomplicated sun on my shoulders. Oddly, my body quickly accepted the quietude. My soul, however, remained restless. The moment I closed my eyes, the dry, sharp sound of the slap across Simone's cheek, cutting through the water's roar, surfaced violently from the deep, dragging everything with it. My own old bruises, the thick makeup that covered them, the desperate internal whisper of, "Just don't let the child hear," and the image of Simone, soaked and with wet hair, held brutally by my son like a set of reins. I would sit on a garden bench and replay the events. I saved myself, I thought with a burning guilt. But what about her? One day, while I was sitting alone, methodically crushing a dry marigold seed ball in my palm, I heard a voice. "Excuse me, are you Evelyn Hayes, the marvelous high school English teacher?" I looked up instantly and recognized Brenda Shaw, a colleague who had retired several years before me. She hadn't aged much. She still had the same warm, genuine smile and the lively, intelligent eyes. We hugged fiercely, laughing at the unexpected, improbable meeting, and immediately started talking over one another, asking about health, children, and the latest school gossip. For a blissful moment, I felt an intense relief, as if I had been instantly transported back to the safety of the faculty lounge, amidst endless mugs of tea and familiar complaints about rebellious students. A young woman with delicate features and profoundly tired eyes approached us. "Mom, I brought you some fresh fruit," she said quietly. "This is my Naomi," Brenda introduced. "Naomi, please say hello to Evelyn Hayes." Naomi offered a polite, distant smile, placed the fruit bag down, said a quiet goodbye, and hurried away. I watched her retreating form and instantly recognized the same strained gentleness in her shoulders that I saw in Simone, the identical, quiet, too perfect smile. "Don't you find," I said carefully, testing the waters, "that your Naomi has a look of deep, deep exhaustion in her eyes?" Brenda sighed, a sound like a heavy weight being finally released from her chest. "You saw it instantly, Evelyn, and your own face today looks like you're carrying a burden too heavy for one person. The quiet here doesn't seem to be helping you much either." Her words hit me with painful precision. Everything I had rigorously held back for weeks began tugging desperately to escape. We moved to a secluded bench where the thick bushes screened us completely from the path. There, I told her everything. No embellishments, no melodrama, just the bare, painful truth, the way I used to teach my students to construct an essay based only on facts. The upscale apartment, the terrifying nightly shower ritual, Simone's bruise, the horrific slap, my instinctive steps backward, and my cowardly escape to the community. I spoke, and Brenda listened without a single interruption, gently stroking my hand the way one smooths an accidental crease from a valuable piece of paper. When I finally finished, there was not an ounce of blame in her gaze, only clear compassion and firm resolution. "You have survived too much pain, Evelyn," she said softly, "and yet you still found the strength to articulate all that horror out loud." She sighed again. "Evelyn, what you witnessed, that is precisely what my Naomi endured." Then she began to speak about her own daughter. The husband, outwardly polished, calm, successful. It started with subtle words, then escalated to small pushes, and eventually a closed hand. For too long, Brenda admitted, she thought Naomi simply needed to endure it. "A family is hard work. A man needs peace," she had mistakenly believed. It was only when Naomi appeared one day with a deep bruise and utterly vacant eyes, not sad, not angry, but simply empty, that Brenda understood. Endurance was not a cure. It was a vast, toxic smokescreen, behind which her son-in-law was free to inflict whatever damage he desired. "I wept," Brenda confessed. "I begged my daughter's forgiveness for being so willfully blind. Then I told her, 'That's it. No more. We end this now.'" They found a sharp lawyer and began collecting every shred of evidence they could. The court case was grueling and difficult, but Naomi was free. Brenda fell silent, giving me the grace of shared silence beside her. A profound stillness settled between us, clear and even as the garden pathway. "Evelyn," she finally said, her voice soft but absolutely firm. "Your daughter-in-law is someone's daughter. Someone raised and protected her too. Imagine if her parents had seen your husband's grandson by that water barrel. You are a mother, yes, but you are also a woman who understands. If you cannot talk sense into your son, you have one other option. Stand with her. Not for her, but with her. Help her leave. Help her live." Every single word struck me with painful accuracy. I nodded, and then I confessed the shameful thing that still held me hostage. "I am terrified, Brenda. I am still so afraid. It feels like that trauma happened yesterday." "I understand completely," she replied, squeezing my hand tight. "And precisely because you understand this specific kind of terror better than anyone else alive, you cannot afford to stand aside. Fear does not disappear because you hide from it. It retreats only when you deliberately walk toward what you fear and do what you know is right. We sat a little longer in mutual silence. The garden rustled with the sound of leaves. Nearby, someone laughed lightly. Life was going on around us, and the steady normalcy of it somehow instilled calm in my shaking resolve. I wiped my eyes, gripped Brenda's hand, and said, "Thank you. I know what I have to do now." The old protective teacher in me resurfaced, ready for the difficult lesson ahead. That evening, back in the sanctuary of my small room, I retrieved an old leather-bound address book. I found a familiar ballpoint pen tucked between the pages, held it tight in my fingers until the trembling subsided, and wrote on a fresh sheet, "Attorney Leonard Price." I stared at the name, took a deep, steadying breath, pulled the phone toward me, and dialed the number. Attorney Leonard Price answered almost immediately, his voice calm, professional, and entirely devoid of excessive emotion. We met soon after in his downtown office. The space was utilitarian. Stacks of files towered on every surface. A classic green lamp shed focused light, and the window pane rattled faintly from the persistent street noise below. I recounted the entire narrative, speaking clearly, without embellishment, just like a teacher presenting a complex case during a staff meeting. He listened intently, asking only short, clarifying questions and taking sparse, precise notes. "We need an undeniable basis for evidence," he concluded. "No emotion, just irrefutable facts. Will you commit to helping her obtain this? If you do, we can handle this case." A few days later, Simone arrived at the community to visit me, carrying a large basket of fruit, her usual strained smile held rigidly in place by visible effort. We found that same secluded bench in the garden where the shade was deep and the pathways were empty. I took her hands in mine and spoke the simple, terrifying truth. I saw. She tried instantly to object, offering hurried words of denial, the familiar ingrained defense mechanism. But then something inside her finally broke. She cried the kind of desperate, raw crying reserved for moments of total surrender, without a single thread of strength left in her voice to hold on to. I said nothing, simply holding her hands, waiting patiently until the profound pain had worked its way through her body. When her tears finally subsided, I began speaking calmly, detailing our strategy, step by step, about how we would move forward into battle. "Listen carefully and execute this exactly as I instruct," I told her, my voice unwavering. "First, any threat or insult, instantly turn on the voice recorder on your phone. Do not argue. Do not provoke. Second, every single mark, even the small ones, photograph it immediately. Use daylight. Note the date and the precise time. Send it instantly to the hidden email address we create. Only we two will know the password. Third, start a diary. Short bullet points only. Day, hour. What exactly did he say? What did he do? Was anyone present? Fourth, documents. Anything that demonstrates income or assets, contracts, statements, bank records. Do not steal or damage anything. Just carefully make copies or take photos when they are conveniently lying out in the open. Simone flinched, her eyes wide with fear. What if he notices the phone or the diary? "Be meticulous. Be careful," I replied, my voice hard. "Freedom rarely comes without a steep price, but you are no longer alone. I am here with you, and the lawyer is here, waiting." We went over the final hardest part. "In the end, you will say the word, divorce," I instructed. "Your only job then is not to argue, not to explain, but simply to say it and leave. Come directly to me or go to a trusted friend. I will call the taxi. I will meet you at the community gate. After that, it becomes the adult's job." She nodded, her face pale but resolute. In her eyes, for the first time in what felt like forever, there was not only fear, but a flicker of stubborn, nascent determination. The long, tension-filled days began. Simone faithfully sent photographs to the hidden email, narrow, fading yellow-blue marks on her wrist, her temple, her shoulder. Short audio files arrived. Marcus's cold, biting, indifferent voice, every syllable precisely aimed at her most vulnerable spot. The diary entries were dry and factual, like legal documents. 1:30 a.m., came back, snapped, broke a cup, pushed. 7:10 p.m., forbade me from calling Mom. Sometimes she managed to send pictures of financial papers. I forwarded every piece of evidence immediately to Attorney Price. He replied with the curt word, "received," and less frequently, the short, encouraging word, "good." I walked the garden pathways, holding my phone as if it were a fragile pulse in my hand. Every new message was a contradiction, both a sharp knife of pain and a firm stepping stone toward freedom. Finally, we had enough. One nervous morning, a short text arrived. "Mom, I'm saying it tonight." I couldn't settle down all day. A restless shadow paced my small room, a distant, ancient echo of my own past anxiety. By evening, I was sitting rigidly on the edge of the bed, staring at the phone. Around 10 o'clock, it finally rang. Simone's number. "Hello, baby. How are you?" I asked, the words barely touching my lips. "I said it," her voice came through, trembling violently. After that, the line was consumed by chaos. I heard a sickening crash, a roaring shout, a choked, terrified cry. "Give me the phone!" And then the line went dead. I called back immediately, again and again. Silence. A terrifying half-hour later, the phone rang again, this time Marcus's number. I answered instantly. "Mom," he said, his voice cold, flat, and utterly unfamiliar. "Who gave you the right to interfere? Did you put her up to this pathetic stunt? Do you genuinely believe you can destroy my family? No. From this moment forward, she will not leave this apartment, and she will never see you again." Click. Silence. I don't recall consciously pressing the correct buttons. My hand found Attorney Price's number entirely on its own. "Emergency," I stated, my voice terrifyingly calm, like a person leading a fire drill at school. "He has locked her inside. He is actively threatening her. We have to act now." After that call, everything moved with terrifying speed and precision, like a pre-drawn diagram. A police report was filed. A dispatch was sent. The apartment door was forcibly opened. Simone was inside, hysterical and terrified, bearing fresh marks on her body. A doctor was called immediately to document the injuries. A temporary safe location was secured. Only the lawyer and I knew the address. The crucial video footage, the physical evidence, and the new medical report went directly into the case file. Simone went into the blessed silence, a place where she could finally sleep without jumping at every noise. I knew, however, that this was only the start. Paperwork is not protection. Marcus was not the kind of entitled man who would ever back down from a fight. I steeled myself for his inevitable call or his dramatic appearance. And 2 days later, just as the garden was sweet with the scent of freshly mown grass and the bees were buzzing lazily, he appeared at the community's secure front gate. He walked onto the property with the quick, hard stride of a man entering his own private office. He wore a sharp suit, now slightly rumpled, and his eyes were bloodshot and raw. He found me sitting calmly in the garden. He didn't offer a greeting. He immediately towered over my bench. "Mom, what in God's name are you doing? At your age? You have maliciously destroyed my family." I closed my book slowly and placed it deliberately on the bench beside me. "Families are not destroyed by those who courageously pull people out of harm's way," I said, my voice steady. "They are destroyed by those who selfishly drive them into it. This is my personal business. I was raising my wife. A woman needs to know her proper place. You, of all women, should completely understand that principle." He spoke softly, but with that familiar, cold certainty that made the nearby leaves on the bushes seem to rustle nervously. "Abuse is not discipline, Marcus," I countered, my voice low and firm. "It is a crime. If there is any shred of humanity left in you, stop this now and apologize to Simone. Apologize before it is entirely too late." He scoffed, a contemptuous sound. Apologize for what? I provide for her. An apartment. Comfort. All she had to do was remain quiet and obey, and you coached her to ruin me. Listen to me. If you continue to help her, that is it. It is absolutely over between us. You can consider yourself permanently without a son. Pity, the deep, reflexive stirring every mother feels, momentarily twisted inside me. But the word had been spoken, the ultimatum issued, and I knew the profound cost of this choice. Then that is precisely how it will have to be, I said quietly, looking him straight in the eye. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to an ice-cold threat. And don't you dare dream of divorce. I will retain the best, most tenacious lawyers in the state. I will easily prove she is unstable, that she has hang-ups and manufactured drama. She won't receive a penny of the settlement. And if there happens to be a child, she will never see it. Do you understand? He turned on his heel and walked away with the same arrogant stride, leaving behind only the expensive scent of cologne and a raw, gaping void in which the birds seemed to be singing louder than usual. Then began the part that always seems to drag on longer than life itself: paperwork, motions, endless hearings. Attorney Price held the line sharply, efficiently, devoid of emotion. Marcus hired expensive, shrewd, and tenacious lawyers who were masters of manipulation. They immediately argued that our audio recordings were doctored, the photographs of the bruises were self-inflicted injuries, and the medical report was simply the result of an accidental fall. They even produced a statement from a questionable doctor, complete with an official stamp, claiming Simone suffered from a severe personality disorder and was prone to dramatic exaggeration. I sat silently on the back bench, listening as strangers' cynical mouths attempted to grind genuine pain into meaningless paper dust. Simone remained outwardly resolute, but by the close of every hearing, I would see her quiet fingers twisting the edge of her silk scarf until her knuckles were white. At night, I would call her, talking about deep breathing exercises and soothing tea with honey, just as I used to reassure anxious girls before a crucial exam. Then I would stare out my dark window, watching the tiny green light on my router, blinking persistently, like a fragile heart monitor. The case began to stall. The judge frowned more frequently, speaking vaguely of insufficient evidence and contradictions in the timelines. It felt as though, at any moment, the entire case might slide fatally into the category of not proven. One anxious evening, my phone buzzed, displaying Simone's name. "Mom!" Her voice was instantly agitated and raspy. We have incredible hope. The neighbors across the hall, they recently installed a sophisticated new camera system, top of the line. One camera points directly at our floor, right down the hallway. The night he dragged me in, Mom, it's all there, clear as day. Everything. I sat up, physically stunned. Are you absolutely certain? The neighbor was reviewing footage today, saw us, and immediately called me. I've already contacted Attorney Price. He's on his way there right now. Mom! She was laughing and crying simultaneously. Every movement is visible, his hand in my hair. His words are clearly visible on his lips. The lawyer and I met late that night near the neighboring building's entrance. Sober faces, a heavy folder, conversations conducted in terse, short phrases. Attorney Price meticulously verified the timestamp, obtained a certified copy of the video, called a police officer to formally document the transfer, and handled the handover strictly by the book, ensuring no technical detail could collapse in court later. On the phone screen, visible in the dim streetlight, was the narrow hallway of the 18th floor, the cold, stark lamplight, and the clear figures. Marcus savagely yanking Simone. Another brutal tug, and his lips moving, the threats readable even without sound. "We are filing tomorrow," the lawyer stated curtly. "A motion to admit the new video evidence and a certified copy to the investigators. Let them dare try to call this self-infliction now." The night was almost morning. that transitional time when the sky is lightening but the birds are still uncertain if it's time to sing. I returned to the community, sat on my bed, and clasped my hands together as I used to do in my youth. Give us strength. In the morning, Simone and I met at the courthouse doors. She was bone-white, but her gaze was steady and unwavering. Attorney Price placed the flash drive and the large printed stills onto the evidence table and said curtly, "Your Honor, a video recording from the common area of the neighboring building. We request an immediate viewing." The judge nodded. The clerk moved a small speaker closer to the monitor and activated the screen. The hallway of our 18th floor flashed onto the black rectangle. The date and timestamp were clear at the bottom. The elevator doors opened, and two figures stumbled out. The screen clearly showed that excruciating moment. Marcus holding Simone by her hair, the savage tug, the unmistakable slap, another rough yank, and his lips moving, the threats vividly readable even without accompanying sound. The courtroom fell into such a deep, absolute silence that the faintest creak of a chair sounded like a clap of thunder. Marcus's expensive, smug lawyers exchanged panicked glances. I saw one attorney's hand tremble visibly on his pen. The judge stared fixedly at the monitor for a long, heavy moment, then said briefly, his voice cold, "Admit the evidence." The attorney nodded once, and I asked that a copy immediately be sent to the investigating authorities for review. After that pivotal moment, the case shifted onto an entirely different, faster track. The defense team dramatically lowered their tone. The baseless papers about self-infliction instantly lost all power, and to avoid criminal charges and public humiliation, Marcus's lawyers strongly advised him to settle immediately. He agreed quickly, like all people accustomed to coldly calculating their risks. The court's final decision was clear and unambiguous. Divorce granted, joint assets split absolutely equally, plus substantial, non-symbolic financial compensation for the severe harm caused to Simone's health and well-being. The day we received the official copy of the decision, embossed with the state seal, Simone cried uncontrollably. But these tears were different. They were devoid of any fear, just the sheer exhaustion of the trauma finally leaving her body like a dangerous fever breaking after a prolonged illness. Life moved on, entirely devoid of violence. Simone bought a small, bright apartment in a different district of the city. Her windows faced the quiet, sunlit courtyard, and the morning sun streamed generously into the kitchen. We placed basil plants on her windowsill, and immediately the apartment smelled profoundly like home, like safety. Her first solo drive was to me. Not to take me away permanently, but simply to sit together on a small stool, drinking tea, sharing the calm, like two women who have miraculously survived a terrifying storm and finally made it safely to shore. "Mom," she whispered, hugging me tight, her cheek pressed against mine. "If it weren't for you—" "Don't you dare say that," I replied gently, stroking her hair. "You saved yourself. Someone just happened to be nearby to give you a hand at the crucial right time." We drank tea, sitting in a long, companionable silence that felt not empty, but profoundly kind. Then Simone became shy, her cheeks flushing a light pink. She lowered her eyes, placing a protective hand over her stomach, like a girl sharing a secret. "I have one more small piece of news. It seems fate decided to take pity on us after all. I'm over 2 months along." At first, I didn't comprehend the magnitude of the news, but then I did, and I laughed out loud through my hot, surprised tears. When a person finally walks out of a suffocating cage, there is suddenly unexpected space in their life for a quiet, small, profoundly true miracle. The woman who had been humiliated and perhaps even called barren by Marcus was going to be a mother. It felt perfectly simple and perfectly right, as if life itself had decided to definitively draw the line for us. The news of the pregnancy somehow reached Marcus. He immediately began sending desperate messages, calling Simone first, then me. He claimed he finally understood that he had been an absolute monster, that we absolutely must give him one last chance, that he would fix everything. I listened to one of his long, manipulative calls completely to the end, and then I answered him, calmly, firmly. The night you locked a terrified woman in your apartment and hit her, your chances ended permanently. Do not call either of us again. Then I blocked his number. Simone delivered her own firm, final no as well. The scars etched deep into the heart are not erased by a single convenient promise. We each lived our own new lives, but side by side. I remained happily at the community. I had my friends there, my reliable routine, and the beloved library, where I knew the exact shelf that housed my favorite Thomas Hardy novel in its worn, old edition. I visited Simone frequently. We spent hours choosing delicate curtains, debating the perfect spot for the crib, arguing happily over the merits of various blankets and tiny baby clothes, walking slowly in her quiet courtyard, and counting the windows of other distant apartments. One afternoon, she gently took my hand, looked me straight in the eye, and quietly asked, "My own mother died a long time ago. Can I call you Mom, not just for the baby's sake, but for myself? So that the child has a grandmother and a mother's mother, not just on paper, but genuinely in life." I nodded, unable to stop the sudden, profound flood of tears. Sometimes life works that way. You lose a son, but in the process, you gain an authentic daughter. Not by blood relation, but closer because she was chosen, completely and truly, by the heart. Marcus disappeared completely from our lives, not because he was physically erased, but because two grown women made a clear, unified decision that he was no longer necessary. And in that definitive decision was profound respect, not for him, but for ourselves. Perhaps one day he will finally understand that true power is not found in grabbing someone's hair or unilaterally deciding who is allowed to do what, but in having the quiet, internal ability to stop the violence. That, however, is no longer my problem to solve. Now, my days are simple, structured, and steady. Morning light exercise, slowly, without excessive heroics. My knees and back never fail to remind me of my age. Then, a pleasant breakfast with my new friends, quiet conversation. Who designed what flower bed, who read which book. In the afternoon, I take the short drive across the city to Simone's apartment. I grab my pre-signed visitor pass, put on my light shawl, and travel halfway across the metropolis. Simone and I set the table, review the latest, comforting paperwork from the prenatal clinic, and laugh about how much the little one loves to perform vigorous kicks in the late evening. I return to the community, where I am always met by my people. We sit together by the large window, and someone inevitably brings out savory potato puffs, warm and comforting, just like in the old faculty lounge. I often contemplate the true moral of this long, difficult story. Perhaps it is this: evil rarely dissipates on its own. It must be actively stopped. And silence is never neutrality. It is, in fact, taking the side of the oppressor. Sometimes, society demands that we accept a warped, toxic idea, that a family is held together by endless patience. No, a family is held together only by mutual respect and genuine care. Where fear dominates, a family exists only in brittle photographs. And one final crucial thing. Blood is not always thicker than a conscious choice. The people who become your true family are the ones with whom you are finally, completely unafraid. My life, once a turbulent sea, is now a calm harbor. The journey from fear to action was like navigating a dark maze, but the end result, peace and a chosen daughter, is the purest form of redemption. Did you like my story? If you listened till the end, drop a number 1 in the comments. If you enjoyed it, you can support me by liking the video and sending a small tip. I've got lots of other life stories like this on my channel, so make sure to subscribe and check them out. I've added 2 new stories on screen that everyone loves. Thanks for being here. See you in the next one. With love.